And I think that only came about because I was in this peculiar circumstances of just trying to decide, just trying to use WordPress in my comment engine. Some of the techniques here basically are screen scraping, obviously, and there's different ways of doing that. DOM munging, once you pull stuff back, it's yours to do whatever you want, and the tweaking and so on. And you have options here. You can either do it when you pull it back, or in the case like a beginning Ruby and the Yahoo libraries, you munge things up inside the browser. And ultimately what it comes down to is proxies, because you want to have all the nasty non-Ruby stuff on one side of the wall and all the Ruby goodness on this side, and the magic proxy thing in the middle. And depending on how you set the proxies up, it may make it easier to distribute things. I mean, there's no reason in the case of my comment engine that it has to run on any one particular machine, since we're just sending requests from one process to another. A couple of other observations. Most websites are offering real web APIs, which greatly simplifies all this. The track is going to have XML RPC baked in. Even still, there's an advantage just making a point that however easy it is to go straight against some web API, you will still want to wrap it up in something, because at some point that API is either going to change or go away. And so proxies afford decoupling. And hey, it's just, if you understand some principles of object-oriented programming where you want to code to the interface and not so much to particular objects, it makes things a lot cleaner and a lot less fragile. So some good goals for doing this is to get a clean Ruby API for your client code, so that you can write code that makes sense to you and whoever you're working with, and not have to worry about the particular quirks or so on of what's being exposed by somebody else's API. Whenever I get a chance to become more familiar with, say, tracks, XML, RPC, it may not be the whole set of commands and requests that I find intuitive or want, and I may very well want to wrap that in some other way, so that from my point of view, I get the right code that just makes more sense, is more intuitive to a Ruby developer. Other things worth adding is robust exception handling. Some applications just don't do that. You make a bad request, and it just either returns nothing or blows up, and it's much nicer if you have some proxying there that adds a bit more smarts to your system, so your clients don't wig out when they don't get quite what they want. And just in general, these sorts of buffers will help you avoid some vendor lock-in, so that at any point, if you want to change from WordPress to something else, from track to something else, it becomes less of a problem for all of your client code. Some variations on this, which I'm actually not going to go into too much detail on. RubyStuff's just it's a front end to a bunch of Cafe Press T-shirts. There was a bunch of screen scraping there going on, where I would just fetch the web pages for each of the different shops that make up this thing. And it's built with an early version of Mechanizing, but basically it's a static site. I mean, I only have to build the site once and then regenerate it when the time comes that I add new content. Interesting thing, though, is Cafe Press is now offering a web API, and they have some sort of beta development program and so on to make it a lot easier to go and fetch product information, images, and whatever else, do searches and stuff like that. So it makes my life a lot easier, though what's also nice is what I have in place really only has to change at a certain point, and the bulk of my code that generates the site can stay the same, because all it needs is just a collection of data. So the part that was doing the screen scraping through Mechanize, at some point I can drop that out and replace it with the cleaner set of web API calls, and it works out quite well. So again, if you're looking to do something, you're concerned that you're going to end up doing nasty DOM munging and stuff like that, well, you might as well go do it, because it just seems that before long people are going to offer a decent web API anyway. One of the things, too, I learned when doing this, if you are trying to interact with another site and you're poking around, you should probably avoid fetching their page every 30 seconds while you tweak your XPath selections or your rendering and so on. So that what I came up with, I would fetch a page once, write to a local copy, then reserve it up with an instance of WebRick, and have my app talk to that instead of to the live server. And then I could just bang away at all I want until everything was just kind of right. It's just another form basically mocking out some live site. Cloud Panel is an application I started working on. I don't quite know where I'm going to take it, but it was an administrative tool for Amazon's Web Services Elastic Compute Cloud. And the thing that was similar but different here was it's basically a command line tool. And there are some Ruby tools for it, and there was some web stuff for it, but it wasn't as complete or interesting or obvious to me at the time. So what I ended up doing was similar to screen scraping. I'd wrap it up in various calls. I'd shell out, call things, get the response back, parse it up, and return that. And it seems nasty hackish, but it saved me an awful lot of time just having to retype things from the command line, which is pretty much where it was, what the motivation was. Looking at it now, though, and having spent more time with Capistrano, I would suspect there are a lot better ways to do this than the particular approach I've taken. So there isn't all that much I want to say about it, and I would think that actually for this sort of stuff, Capistrano is a good example of where you have a nice Ruby API and what is essentially a bunch of command line calls and so on. You don't even have to be aware of that so much when certain things happen because you can abstract it enough that you don't worry about it anymore. That's basically it. Like I said, there were some other things I was going to toss at with the Ruby stuff. I'm going to have to go look at their web API to see how that works, and the same with the other things. And that's my talk. I want to also thank Pat Eiler for actually putting all this together. Thank you, Pat. We have time for questions? If there are any questions, the one or two? Yes?
I've got a quick question. When you're talking about the WordPress stuff for the commenting system,
yes.
And this is kind of specific, but you mentioned that you're using hashes of the strings for identifying it. What if the text of the paragraph changes? How do you manage that?
It does exactly what I want it to do. It doesn't find the comments.
And that's what you wanted?
That's basically what I wanted to do. My thought was if I change the text, then the comments that apply to that text probably no longer apply. And so when it goes and fetches it again, now there's residue, right? This is the part I didn't think of, which is my database will eventually, depending on how often I change it, fill up with a bunch of WordPress posts for content that's no longer there.
Okay.
It's a problem I'll worry about when it becomes a real problem. Other questions? Thank you very much.